and I think there was nothing that really showed that more than Marston's. I mean, just at times jaw-dropping what that brewery was doing, and then the scale at which they were doing it. So we left London, we went to Burton, the home of India Pale Ale, the birthplace of India Pale Ale, and really of Pale Ale.
They had the right water for it before they knew much about that.
So if you ever heard of Burtonizing your water, basically every IPA and every pale, even at homebrew levels, it's called Burtonizing your water, and it's to make it taste like this one place on Earth, and it's Burton-on-Trent. And the crazy thing is now even Burtonizes their water.
Right. They
take
the city water from the mains, take everything out of it, and then put everything back in.
And that's funny. The legitimate reason is their wells cannot support the amount of water they need to draw off it anymore. The production is too high.
They do still use the well, they said, for some of their cooling processes and cleaning processes, but it's not actually going into the beer that you drink.
Right. So anyway, we went to Marston's, which again, I mean, this is such an... There are like no stores, at least in Chicago, that carry this beer. I mean, there's like my store, but like other than that, like there's hardly, and I don't mean it that way, but like...
And it's hard to get it fresh, and it's an important beer to be not too old, because I've had this beer once or twice in the States, and it just isn't much of anything.
Yeah.
But here, fresh, we brought it back from the UK, a few weeks ago. It tastes really nice. I mean, it's just biscuity and malty and pleasant, not full of diacetyl. It's just mellow and good drinking and nice.
Yeah.
Yes. And so the thing that makes Marston special, other than being in Burton, it is the last brewery on Earth using the traditional Burton Union fermentation system, which I don't want to get into too much. We have some videos of it, but it's basically a line of, I call them casks, and I realized the Burton Union, the union is the wooden vessel. It's a certain size, it's called a union, and they're linked together, and it's this really fascinating and incredibly expensive by modern standards fermentation method. It's I mean, it's so antiquated. It's just amazing. There's one brewery in the entire world still using the Burton Union, and it's this one here. And it was just such, I mean, if you're I will go out and say, if you are a true lover of beer, seeing the Burton Union is a bucket list item. I mean, it really is. It's
very much a privilege to see. And I mean, Chris talks about there's the unions, which are these big, maybe, a few barrels a piece barrels. They're in the order of a couple hundred gallons, maybe, big wooden barrels, and they're hooked together in sets of something like 30 to 60 of these barrels. And what essentially happens is that there's these big troughs overhead that they pump the beer in, the beer goes into the trough and then filters down into another trough and then runs through a pipe and fills up all these barrels. And this is beer that's been fermenting for roughly 24 hours. And so it's just starting to get its really vigorous fermentation going. And so if you've ever homebrewed and you see that nice Croissant on the top, all that yeast going, that yeast is coming up out of these barrels and spit back into the troughs. And what ultimately happens is that the beer kind of filters down out of the yeast and runs back into the barrels. And the yeast itself, they use squeegees to push out of the troughs into like a big bucket that they then use to then put into the next batch of beer. So they're never using like a lab-grown single strain. They are perpetuating their strain there.
It's like, that's the sort of thing to like a beer geek like Steve and I, it's jaw-dropping, because even like little home breweries, like they buy their yeast, they buy specific isolated strains of yeast, and they just repitch, and if your yeast goes bad, then you just buy some more. But this is a way of keeping their yeast with them, and basically what it is it's a bunch of barrels that are connected. The beer flows evenly throughout one another. It comes up, and the yeast kind of is then collected off the top, and it was really this ingenious contraption that they're still using. And I mean, I don't want to get weepy-eyed or anything, but I can't say how, like, unbelievable that they let us pull some beer, some straight Union beer, because the Pedigree is the only beer they make that has some of the Union beer in it. It's, even by modern standards, you cannot use enough of this, you make enough of this beer in the Union set to be commercially viable. So they blend it back in to keep the tradition going and to keep their yeast.
Right.
But, and our tour guide said she had never seen anyone do this before, and was kind of like, keep this on the down low.
Which
but
we're definitely doing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if theoretically one were to drink
Let's
beer,
just
it were to
say
be straight from the Unions,
it would look like this.
it would look a little like that.
it might be in a ketchup bottle. It might not.
Right. Yeah, good point. So this is not that, I guarantee you. But if this were that, I mean, people talk to me like, what's your... I get asked all the time owning a beer store, what's your... I can hold that while you put a glove on and hold the mic. What's your rarest beer? And I mean, this is, to me, I think, probably the rarest beer I've ever had in my entire life.
Right here.
And it might...
A little bit of wool sock on the outside,
yes,
on the stickiness.
It might be the rarest beer you'll ever have
This is
in
the
your
rarest
life.
beer. I mean, straight Union beer from the last existing Burton Union in the world. And we're gonna try some what we in our minds this would be, which this isn't, but yeah.
This is the one thing I really, really wanted to try when we went to the UK. This was like my whole goal. And
Have you guys had this yet?
so we tried some of the very green beer at the pub right after the tour. All right, a little bit of rinse going on.
Yeah.
Even though we're drinking off the Pedigree,
I hope it's
basically the same
full of
thing.
diacetyl.
But I heard that you went the first day and there was no beer or yeast in it, and
Right.
that you just saw, because they were cleaning everything
That
out.
is true. So
you got to see the layout, and then the next day you were invited back again because they were brewing the next day.
Firestone Walker is the one brewery that's doing something a little bit like this, which is they've got their Firestone Union, and so the next day is kind of a little bit of a gift, a little bit of a ruse, a Trojan horse. We got in the door by bringing them some Firestone, I think it was their 17th anniversary beer, and we gave it to them as a gift. And then when we were walking by the Union sets, one of the guys from the day before came out and he's like, oh, you wanted to see the Union? We actually just put some beer in here. It's working now, so we got to go in again. And
So is that when they gave you the bottle?
we actually wound up with the bottle on the first day, but we were greedy and we wanted to see it working.
I want to taste this.
So I mean, it's definitely got...
Smells.
It's
Weird, right?
Yeah.
It smells like
Sulfur.
coffee. It smells like coffee.
And sulfur, right?
It's got some of the biscuit and fruit, but there's more there as well.
Now, when this beer was given to us, hypothetically, it was still fermented. It was not properly conditioned. This was fermented beer pulled off for us just to try.
And it tasted very green when we drank
Less
it at the
green
pub.
than this.
Right now, I mean, it's had a chance. There is kind of a yeast cake at the bottom. It's basically bottle conditioned, in the luggage on the flight back from the, hypothetically speaking, and actually,
It's so much better.
I dig it. I'm digging
it's
it.
so much better.
It is much better than it was at the pub.
I think there's some tea-like qualities in this. I mean, when I first smelled it, it smells like coffee to me.
Well, there's the Burton water and the yeast the yeast they use gives off a lot of sulfur, and a lot of people then try to get it out or breed the yeast to not produce it. But Marston's is the one brewery in the world really who is proud of it, and it's called the Burton Snatch.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you guys, get your head out of the gutter.
Wanky.
The Burton Snatch, 884. No. And it's. Yeah, I mean, the water there has just really got a lot of that. I mean, I think it is the water. They said it had a lot of sulfur in it, basically.
Well, the water, and the yeast, and it's not as polished and as finished of a product as the Pedigree, but I mean, you're drinking the story, and it's fun.
I like it. It's weird, but to me, it's got the tea, the coffee aroma. It's sort of like a tea-like quality on the taste for me. I mean, still knowing that it's a beer, but it does taste like I guess kind of like more like the wort. Like when you get that wort, it kind of has like those tea-like qualities. I like it.
Almost like flattish because it's that wort flavor. Yeah.
And I think the next stop, it's not the last journey in our trip. I think maybe we could, Elgood should perhaps be its own.
Maybe it should be its own
thing. I don't think we have it up here anyway, but we'll end halfway through the voyage. Then, actually, right before we went to Burton, we're gonna come back. We stopped at a cidery right on the Welsh border, and just had one of the most wonderful drinking / general experiences I've ever had at Ross-on-Wye Cidery. Just wonderful hospitality. I mean, I'm going to tell you something that sounds like it might be miserable, and I'm going to tell you it was just one of the joys of my life, was to be sitting in a dank, cobwebby cellar with guys who, with a wet dog who stunk the place up. It was raining all over the place outside, and half the people there were covered and smelled like pig shit, drinking ciders that were mousy and bready and tart and tannic, and it was just such a great experience to go and really kind of just share kind of what these people do. The cider people in Britain are, I mean, people say, kind of like the beer people say, the cider people don't know what they're doing. They're kind of like country bumpkins. And in a way, what they're getting at is that this is just what they've been doing forever. Yeah.
I'm just gonna grab one thing.
Yeah. This is what they've been doing forever. They've been, yeah, there you go. There's Ross-on-Wye. They deserve a little plug.
Yeah.
This guy got into cider making because that's what his father had done, and presumably his grandfather had done. And he was really an apple seller, and one year Bulmers, who is Magner's, didn't buy his apples, so he's like, well, I've got all these apples, I'll try selling it and making it. And that was like 30 years ago. And now every year that Bulmers, he's been making it every year since, and whenever Bulmers would decide to ask him to grow a new varietal, he'd pull a couple trees aside in his allotment. So at this point, he has 100 different types of cider that or apples that he gets juice from, and some he does and blends, and it was much more just, I don't know what's happening. I think this is what happens, but I don't know. But more importantly, his skill was in blending, and he reminded me very much of a lambic brewer there, where he's like, I don't know how it gets there. This apple does this, and then I blend it with this, and this is what you have. And it was just so cool.
So what are we drinking here?
Yeah.
It's very good.
He was extremely honest about everything and very open, and drinking cider with him, and then you brought him some American cider, and then we started drinking some American beer, and then he started bringing out beers like this, ciders like this, which this is aged in some kind of a barrel from what I remember.
Yeah. This was, I believe, was it a gin barrel? Is this gin barrel Perry?
I think that this one maybe, but I sort of lost track because at the end, I mean, the hospitality is like, oh, you gotta take a bottle of this, oh, you gotta take a bottle of this, oh, you gotta take a bottle of this, and I was like, thank you.
He probably gave us a case of some of his most special ciders and Perrys he's ever made, and refused to take a dime for any of it.
That's awesome.
I mean, it was just such an incredible experience. So he had these rare Scotch barrel-aged ciders. He had a gin barrel Perry, and again, you're drinking the experience here, and we wanted to just share it with you. If any of you guys are ever out in the UK, they have a B&B, and I cannot enough recommend that you go to Ross-on-Wye and just experience what the English countryside is, and just drinking some traditional scrumpy. And people ask me what scrumpy is, and I asked. Scrumpy is not specifically a style. It's cloudy, unfiltered beer with chunks in it. There's chunks.
Cider.
Oh yeah, cider and perry with like chunks floating in it. That's what it is, and it's very disrespected in London. Very disrespected over beer, and I just think it's wonderful. Just because they don't know what's going on doesn't mean that they don't know how to make it into a really nice end product. So
Yeah, I think this is fabulous. It's dry, yet it's got sweetness to it as well. I mean, it's perfectly balanced.
I really liked it a lot. And what I liked about the story and everything, I don't know, I was looking at the pictures, and when you say like you were in this dank, musty cellar, like it was literally a cellar. It was literally like this underground area.
literally, yeah.
It was like a cave under there.
And you know what? I think honestly that comes through in the cider for me. I mean, this when Chris mentions the wet dog and kind of like the barnyard type themes here, I feel like that comes through because I feel like this. I do get barnyard in this cider. I do get kind of like that wet dog type.
They call it
thing.
mousy.
Yeah,
and
mousy.
to me, mousy is the perfect expression for these Brett heavy English beers. And I can't say why, but
It's
like
not Brett in a bad way. It's Brett in a good way.
Right.
You're not getting some of those kind of rough phenolics, but I think it speaks volumes that we were on a beer trip. We saw tons of breweries. We went to tons of pubs.
And
I
the
think
cider
we
is
all
what-
had the best time at the Cider and Perry Company.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just wonderful.
because of the people. And when it comes down to it, that's what this is all about. It's about the story. It's about the people. It's this is the story as well, but there's a lot of, I think, I don't know, people on a different path than we are, where it's all about how rare. Well, how rare is this beer? How limited is this beer? And I mean, I guess I'm all about that too here, but it's like, I mean, just getting to the essence of what beer is, and I mean,
Let's just get this guy in the
Yeah.
The essence of what a beer is, it's a product. I mean, it's an agricultural product, and
Made by people.
Made by people, and I think that's kind of what the union. It kind of has a story to it, but certainly the cider as well. Like it's that's when you really know, like that's where your beer is made. You kind of forget that that's the origins of it.
I have one final question for you. Can I get a spin on the giant wheel, Bob?
Come on down.
Closest to $1. Anyways, thank you so much. Is there anything else that we missed?
Well, we need to talk about beer download. I don't think we've actually formally discussed that yet, have we? So, beer download?
It's a podcast that pits beers head to head in a tournament-style competition to find out which beer reigns supreme. You guys all know the tagline.
I knew you'd have something to say about that. All right, so we've got some delicious
I think we should choose.
English ciders and beers and
Perries to drink.
whatnots to drink. Yeah, Perry's to drink.
And hopefully you do too. We're gonna go listen to some heavy metal,
You have a wheel.
and I think we should go have a beer.
Yeah, cheers. Go have a
Cheers,
beer.
guys. See ya.